Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at GCNlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@USAPrepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Man, it's freezing here. It's 19 degrees in our neck of the woods in Missouri. Nathan is engineering the broadcast in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. If you'd like to call in, we'll pay for the call. 866-582-9933. 866-582-9933. Telephone listen line, 605-477-3249. Rich Scheben's with us. Rich, welcome.
Well, thank you, Vince. How are you doing this morning?
I do it just fine, Rich. I wanted to thank you for guest hosting last week. I really appreciate it. Really do.
My pleasure. It's always fun.
Thank you. Rich, I was listening to the top of the hour news, and I heard a term that I don't think I learned when I was studying finance and economics, at the university in the 1970s. Wage momentum. Wage momentum. So it sounds like, if I were to hazard a guess, it sounds like wages are moving, and probably that means they are increasing, which probably means inflation is increasing. What's your take on the term wage momentum?
Well, when I do a lot of reading on economy and finance, and it's pretty obvious to me that we're either at the end of a bull market or in a bear market, beginning of a bear market, because when you hike interest rates into going into a recession, which the economy is cyclic, okay, and I've given shows on how the math is rigged and how the books are cooked. But what I see is an abundance of debt leverage. Now, then you got to look at a lot of subsets under there, like the ratio of domestic debt to international debt. It's pretty obvious that most printed money goes to Wall Street and not to Main Street. And I've given thousands of examples of that. Just QE alone, quantitative easing, and we're heading into quantitative tightening, which is the opposite. And they're basically desperate. And I don't know. People always say the central banks don't know what they're doing. They're in a corner. I think they know exactly what they're doing, because their job is to save the banks. Their job is to save the stock market and Wall Street and its legitimacy. And we all know there's nothing legitimate about it. And their main objective is to maintain the status quo, what I call the incognito caste system. So they want us to use redefined units of measures, redefined definitions of words, and this is why there's so many attacks on the First Amendment, because they don't want us to speak up. I mean, when Republicans, how come it's an attack on the First Amendment when Republicans criticize the press, the mainstream media? But Democrats can openly threaten arrests when we report the truth. And we're in a very dangerous time in America, because if you look at history, this is when Hegelian dialectic and professional wordsmithing, media propaganda, subliminal messaging, however you want to define it, it's a little bit of all of the above, you look at countries, we're right at the cusp of where countries lose it. They lose their freedom, their liberty, the rule of law, and then comes gun control, arrests, for posting something on Facebook that wakes the masses up, or any social media, and then genocide, murder, rape, and mayhem and race wars come simultaneously. So as we look at the abundance of debt leverage that we have in America, from what my research shows me, the wage increase is only for the top about 7%. Everybody else is losing ground because of the debt loads that they have. It's analogous to margin debt. And margin debt is historically known for when people start needing liquidity in order to pay their bills because they're becoming less solvent. That's when people sell things for pennies on the dollar, and the super wealthy buys things for pennies on the dollar because the masses have to liquidate in order to pay those bills. Now, when you look at corporate debt, junk bonds, zombie companies, they really all mean the same thing. It's the same problem, and it's going to continue to fuel the bear market and the recession that we go into. And none of the printing of money creates real growth. So, as increased interest rates keep going up into an obvious recession, this is going to enhance the bear market. The big question that most people have is this going to be a crash or a sustained insolvency and increased leverage? Because we really have two economies. One economy is for I got to remove this kitten. We just got a new kitten, pardon me. He's getting into everything. So let me just give a few examples. Okay, and I talked about this in great detail, but I'm just going to hit some high points. I remember saying about a month ago how the IMF and Fed insiders literally admitted that everything is rigged. And we can't ignore math, because not only have we been in a subprime loan situation for autos, but we are also entering a subprime mortgage catastrophe, and I've given examples of that. And not to make simplicity of the economy, but it's very obvious that when housing and autos go, so does the rest of the economy. And we've given many, many examples on how George Soros and the NGOs he's using UN and U.S. taxpayer-funded money for anti-consumer everything, including the illegal immigrant caravan. We got to look at this math. We got to look at how global QE is now plummeting from $180 billion per month to supposedly zero with quantitative tightening. We have to look at the Swiss National Bank that's printed money out of thin air, like the Fed and all the other central banks, which are Keynesians. And then the U.S. ships them $1 billion worth of dividends and profits. Can you imagine if we, as poor/middle class, in other words, bottom 93% of income earners, could just press a button, print money, and get so-called dividends for profits without doing anything? Well, this is the area that we're in right now. And that, again, reduces the fiat currency confidence and makes more inflationary pressures. So look at the quid pro quo that's going on, the creation of the illusion of the velocity of money. And one great example, I think I gave this a few months ago, it's called a wash trade. It's basically the same similar companies or industries trading at the same time. So an example is when one bank buys, one bank sells. Basically, it's collusion and racketeering. And it needs to be brought out in the open, it needs to be addressed. Let me give a few specific examples. General Motors pays 4.1% of dividend and yields. yet their cash flow is negative. How can that be a business model? And then you look at certain companies like Coca-Cola pays its investors more money than the business generates. So as companies do this, they just go into more debt. Again, there are illusions of, and these illusions are happening all over the place. And according to the Wall Street Journal, 60% of corporate debt used by the Russell 2000 is rated as junk. And 25% of Russell 2000 firms don't even make money. I can go on and on with so many examples. Treasury debt is expanding its bond auctions to fund our booming economy. More debt on debt. How can this oxymoron, hypocrisy, Twilight Zone episode be legitimate when we have such a great economy and we have to expand our debt? It just doesn't make any sense. And then we have more than 50% of mortgages being issued by non-banks. Now, I've read it's as little as 20%. So what this means is synonymous to credit standards decreasing. And I've talked about this in great detail with the yield curve, the flattening, the narrowing of the yield curve. So this is just an example that the credit market is going south. From loan sharks to credit unions are picking up the slack, and when credit standards decrease, it creates a false economy. Bankruptcies, delinquencies, and defaults, I'm reading about becoming more and more common every day. And this momentum is going to be hard to stop under the present system that we have that doesn't even allow truth. So if the economy is so great, why are the powers that be privatizing free speech, shadow banning, using algorithm-based censorship? When you live in a land that's bought and paid for and there's no longer law and justice, you can't expect a good outcome for the little people. And again, the little people are the bottom 93% of income earners. So when you look at a lot of the data regarding consumer spending, and I should say this during every show, especially when I talk about Economics 101, it's minimum 70% of economic growth, whether it be GDP or whatever unit of measure they use, is based on consumer spending here in the U.S. So we got to keep that in mind. And I will keep discussing a few more examples, Vince, after the break, if it's okay with you.
Sure. Okay. For Scheben, offgridmontana.com. Offgridmontana.com. Rich Scheben, did you want to continue, or do you want me to make a comment?
Yeah, let me mention a few more facts, and
sure.
If you don't mind, Vince. Thank you.
Sure.
You know, people, a lot of anti-American, in other words, pro-globalist people, often get upset when they hear something they don't want the people to hear. Because, again, as you've always heard me say, their MO is to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people by groups. But if we read up, research up, speak up, and vote up, and educate ourselves and others about the corruption, the manipulation, the deception behind the scenes, we have a better chance of controlling our own destiny. I mean, the fact that they're openly saying we need to get rid of free speech, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the ability for the little guy to protect themselves in their own home is beyond Orwellian. It literally says you are not going to be able to control your own destiny. It literally says that hard work, effort, proven results, qualifications, performance now means nothing, because we are going to divide and conquer the people by race, skin pigmentation, gender, sex, sexual orientation, religion, ideology, generation. This all emboldens the aristocracy when we don't read up and speak up. This way, it's a lot easier for them to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, ideology, and sway public opinion, hold on to the narratives. So, looking at the facts and connecting the dots, financial, economic, social, and political rationale together, we can easily see their plan of action, their playbook, their flowchart, their blueprint, their template for the destruction of the free world. Now, going back to a few of the facts about our economy, if everything is so great, why is consumer spending fallen to a 4.5-year low and personal income is lower than that? Debt is going through the roof, and it's not just corporate debt or private debt. It's global debt. And I think most people realize that they're not going to be able to be paid off. And a lot of the smoke in the mirrors, I mentioned this over the summer, when the stock market was going through the roof and the so-called FANG stocks were going through the roof. Well, now the FANGs have been defanged, and most people think it's going to become a lot worse. But when you look at Amazon, Netflix, Microsoft, they combined this summer for basically 71% of the S&P 500 returns and 78% of the NASDAQ 100 returns. Netflix doesn't even make a profit. It's a propaganda tool in order to distract with bread and services and throw in subliminal messaging to make people vote a certain way. It's designed to break your will and make the people submissive. So it's up to us to do our homework and share this information with the people. Look at Apple stock. Apple bought $23.5 billion. This is a record amount. And this shows the financial fraud and the zero foresight that they're pinning on the people. Now, you could have built several border walls alone. Again, with this Apple stock buybacks, we could have built several border walls along our border. Never mind the high dividend payout that went to their primary preferred shareholders. Now, think about the debt here. The amount Apple spent buying back its own shares exceeded the stock market value of most companies in the S&P 500. You heard that right. The first quarter of 2018 was the biggest quarter record for buybacks of $242 billion. I've done whole shows on stock buybacks. And I can certainly go into more detail here today if you want me to, Vince, but I'm blue in the face talking about it, which shows basically how it has feathered the nest of the elite people in the corporations, especially the CEOs, some CFOs, and just the executive branch in the corporate oligarchy. $21 trillion missing from the federal government books. Remember, Michigan University professor, along with Catherine Austin Fitz. What happened to that money? Is it going to pop back into the system and create a hyperinflation? Who knows? All this is math that doesn't get discussed in the mainstream media.
All right, hold that thought. We'll be right back. Rich Shealy. So, Rich, I was just checking the news during the bottom of the hour break, and I saw something that piqued my interest. There's going to be a new series on television. It's called the docu-series. I guess that's the combination of a documentary and miniseries. And it's called The Clinton Affair. And this is with Monica Lewinsky and the blue dress. Now, this might be what's necessary to wake up the GDP as to how filthy our government is. You know, the cover-ups, the lies, the scandals, and so forth. So the Clinton Affair premiere will air on November 18th at 9 p.m. on A&E. Now, I don't know if that's Eastern Time, Central Time, Pacific Time, but you can look that up. The Clinton Affair. So, I'm looking forward to seeing if the GDP pays attention to the scandal where William Jefferson Blythe Clinton said that he did not have sex with that woman. Misusing words, twisting the meanings of words. So I hope that guy that used to be president from Arkansas gets all the credit he deserves for all the lying that he has done. He was impeached, went through the process, and he came out pretty much unscathed. And he has been meeting with the public, smug, arrogant, not concerned about some reporter saying, "Yo, little Willie, what about that dress? What about that blue dress?" He just goes around sometimes with his spouse, who wanted to be president many times, who I'm hearing rumblings and reading rumblings about her popping her ugly head up again in 2020. Boy, wouldn't that be awful? Can you imagine that? Can you imagine Hillary being president? People who I know who have met her absolutely despise her. Absolutely. We've had an instructor on the air who worked for Walmart for 20 years. Met Hillary at corporate headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, and says she's not a nice person. So that's the last thing we need to run corporate USA, Hillary Clinton. Dave, class, for those of you who haven't done this yet, there might be a few of you that this is a new term too. Arkancide. The combination of two words, Arkansas and suicide. Look it up. Or look up the words Clinton, murders on your favorite search engine. Pick any search engine. It's out there. There are almost 100 of them. Almost 100 murders surrounding the Clinton crime syndicate. It's all my opinion. The Clinton crime syndicate. Rich, you were talking about quantitative easing, quantitative tightening. I can tell you this, that automobile sales are falling. And from what I've learned, automobile sales are now, automobiles are being sold not by how much it costs. I remember when my dad was buying a new car back in the 1960s, I went with him to the dealership. They talked about the price, and, with some negotiation, the price came down. They were talking about the price of the vehicle, not the amount of a monthly payment. So from 1965 to today, we have increased the discussion about buying cars, not from the price of the car, but for the amount of the monthly payment. And we're talking 72 months, 84 months, and people actually think that the vehicle is going to outlast the amortization schedule of the vehicle, meaning they think it's going to be fine, no problems, for 84 months. They've lost their minds. That's not true. And the price, I can look up the amount of the average monthly payment. It is sky high. It's way higher than the amount that we paid as a mortgage payment on our house back in the 70s. I mean, a real house. 2 stories, 4 bedrooms, bathrooms, living room, dining room, kitchen. A real house. Brick, with a yard and a driveway and 2 garage doors and a roof and a basement. Way more than the amount of our mortgage payment for that house is the amount that people are paying monthly for an automobile. It's crazy. You have any comments?
I do. First of all, we have to look at the current system. Our present system is not created to reward increased productivity. It's created to increase the wealth and power of the privilege. You mentioned an example about that TV show in the blue dress about the Clintons. Yeah. Well, remember years ago they had a show called Politically Incorrect? It wasn't about political incorrectness. It was just the opposite. So be careful when you, anything that's on the mainstream media, that's on cable, it's sanctioned. The messages are sanctioned, okay? Everything is censored. Everything is made for subliminal messaging to the people, okay? It's a psyop. It's a mind game. This is why the powers that be, especially on the left side, the globalist side, forget about saying the Democrats are liberal. They are not. They're everything but. Everything that they say we are, they are. This is why they use words like racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, climate change, global warming, homophobe, xenophobe, conspiracy theorist, hater, anti-ism, phobia. So they can distract from the cheating on the votes. So they can create division. These people are anti-truth, anti-middle class, anti-individualism, anti-free speech, anti-rule of law, anti-controlling your own destiny. That's what we have in America today. Now, I'm going to read real quick a quote from Ayn Rand. She wrote Atlas Shrugged. I gleaned this off of the X22 report website. When you see, quote, when you see that trading is done by compulsion and not consent, when you see that dollars or money is flowing to those who deal, not in goods, but in favors, when you see men getting richer by graft and pull, basically that means deceit, fraud, using one's position to, especially in public office, to obtain profits and advantages and feed the addictions of power, money, and control. And laws that don't protect you against them, but protect them against you. When you see corruption being rewarded and honesty becoming a self-sacrifice, you know your society is doomed. Again, I gleaned this off of the X22 report, but this is so true, so accurate, and so obvious. Vince?
Okay, I've got some numbers. So the current number of months for a new car loan is 68 months. That's the average, okay? Some car loans are 72 to 84, but the average is 68 months. That's 5.7 years. The average new car payment is $523 a month. $523 a month. The average used car monthly payment is $372 a month. 13 years ago, when we bought our farm, it's 241 acres in Missouri, 241. The annual real estate taxes on our farm, without our house on it, was about $188. It's in the $180 neighborhood. So the annual taxes on our farm 13 years ago are about half of what a used car payment is today. It makes absolutely no sense that people are spending $523 on average for their monthly payment for a new car. And I have a little more information I'd like to share with you. So I was working with my son on a Kia, and there was a water pump leak. And coolant was leaking out of one of the bolts on this water pump. And my son was, consulting with me what I thought. And I said, I'll tell you what, why don't you take the bolt out and put some Permatex pipe sealant or thread sealant on, or gasket sealant on those threads on the bolt and put it back in. He said, okay. So he took the bolt out, and he could get the bolt out about 4 inches before it hit the side of the engine compartment. The engine's mounted sideways in this particular vehicle. So the space that he had to withdraw the bolt from the engine was less than the length of the bolt. The bolt's about 6 inches long. And he said, Dad, there's only 2 ways I can get this bolt out. One is to take the engine out, along with the transmission, or cut a hole, take off the passenger tire, cut a hole in the engine compartment so I can withdraw the bolt, put the sealant on it, and put the bolt back in. He said, you know what? I'm going to tell my customer, bring it to Kia. Well, the rest of the story I'll tell you right after these few short commercial announcements. What I'm going to tell you next, you're going to be shocked at. And you're going to say, who engineers these things? Why would anybody do that? Who would approve these designs? You can buy a water pump from AutoZone starting at $29.99, $30. You can spend a little more if you want. You can spend $49.99. You can spend $43.99. You can spend $58.99 for the water pump at AutoZone. The price, if you want to have that water pump repaired and replaced, have someone else do it, is between $357 and $784. That's for a Kia water pump. Why is it so expensive? Because it's laborious. So, cutting out this, taking the engine out to replace the water pump is nuts. Who would engineer something like that? Well, the easy solution is a mechanic would take a drill and drill a hole in the engine compartment, like a 3/4 inch hole. But the car is so flimsy, I suggested that our son not do that because I didn't want him to weaken the unibody of this particular flimsy vehicle. So I looked on the internet about what other people did to solve this problem. And there's a forum, and I was reading this article on the forum about this other guy had exactly the same problem. Of course he had the same problem. It's the same vehicle with the same poor engineering, the same poor approval process of getting this design into production. So what this guy did was he said he tried everything. He couldn't solve the problem without cutting a hole in the side of the engine compartment. So he had a motorcycle, and he sold his motorcycle to pay for the cost of replacing a water pump. He was going to do it himself. He had the tools, he had the knowledge, but he couldn't figure out how to get this one bolt out without putting a hole in the side of the engine compartment. When you go to buy a new vehicle class, and you look under the hood, and you're looking in the showroom, and the salesman's there, and everybody's smiling and all excited about this, the bright lights and the glare and the shiny finish and all that. And you look under the hood, you do not even consider the possibility that to take a bolt out of a water pump, which is a common item to be replaced, you're going to have to pull the engine out. Or at least lift the engine up maybe 6 or 8 inches, along with the transmission, and disconnect the axle shafts to do that. I mean, how would we even think that would be an issue? But it is. It absolutely is. I bought some headlights for our old Mercedes for our daughter. I just ordered them for her. And these are just the plastic pieces that, cover the bulbs. This is without the bulbs. They're bulbs inside the lights. The least expensive pair of headlights that I could find. Not OEM, not Mercedes brand, but some cheap Chinese ones. $260, $260 for 2 headlights. Now, if you want the Mercedes original equipment, you can spend up to $2,000 for both of them. You get both of them in a box, uninstalled, about $2,000. So if you think that the cost of the ownership is just the monthly payment for these new vehicles, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Then you have maintenance, and then you have gasoline, then you have service, regular service. So keep that in mind. That it's almost impossible for most people to service their own vehicles. Almost impossible. So I just wanted to share that, Rich Scheben. The cost of things is way higher than we think. Way, way, way higher. And you talked about business cycles. Now, if you look back at charts and graphs about inflation, you'll find that before World War I, there was virtually no inflation. None. Once the Federal Reserve got involved in this Ponzi scheme, we started having business cycles. And it's eating us alive. It's a hidden tax. Rich, when we come back, do you want to comment on that?
I'd like to comment on everything.
Okay.
And to answer your question, short term, it's Keynesian economics that's allowing these business cycles and the interest rates and, inflate into, it's all a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. We'll be right back. After top of the hour news and commercial announcements, Rich Scheben, Off-Grid Montana. Rich Scheben's with us, offgridmontana.com. Rich, I mentioned IKEA. I mentioned that the engineers have figured out that you can not service a water pump without drilling a hole in the side of the vehicle or pulling the engine up or out. The cost of repairing vehicles is out of control. And it's difficult for the typical person to service his or her own vehicle, as we used to back in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And you had some comments.
Well, yeah, it's analogous to forced obsolescence. I just want to make a few comments on a few things you said. You talk about payments, for monthly payments. People don't buy houses or cars anymore. They buy payments, monthly payments. But if you owe $1,000 a month, you have to earn, that's net. That's your net charge. You have to earn about $1,400, depending on what tax bracket you're in, to pay for that net. Now, when you talked about your motorcycle guy who had to sell his motorcycle to buy parts, that's an example of margin debt. Now, right now in America, the spread between the S&P and the margin debt is about 4 times greater than right before the 2000 and 2007 crash. So this is what happens when people run out of liquidity or need to sell things for liquidity. People have to sell stocks. People have to sell motorcycles to pay off margin debt. This is just another example. And once that happens, that momentum is unstoppable. Okay, next, you mentioned something, I'm trying to read my notes here, basically you described earlier about Keynesian economics. I got to remind people that Keynesian is created for elite intervention. It's created by the central banks. It's top-down, no accountability, elite control that's corrupt and manipulative to keep the status quo, a.k.a. the incognito caste system. Basically, they say things like deficits don't matter. They believe that you can create an increased economy, but they don't want to increase the economy. They want to increase the illusion of a better economy. And they believe that you can do that by changing the money supply. That's absolutely wrong. It literally affects goods and services, free markets, and prosperity for the little guy. They always say, we got to look at GDP. Well, GDP, you have to have $4, $5, $6, depending on who you read, of increased debt to create $1 of increased GDP. The whole system is corrupt. And this is, you mentioned back in 1913 earlier, this is basically how long Keynesian economics has been going on. It's 80 years or so. You can't print, inflate, and buy now and pay later based on debt-backed currency. It's only allowed to have a certain shelf life. Keynesian teachings even allow government to shift asset and liability columns. That's called creative accounting and manipulation. I'm trying to think what else you talked about. I was, during the break, they talked about the Jim Acosta situation and how he was whining about getting kicked out of the White House, even though he's not showing any respect in the White House and following the rules. Well, basically, what we need is split media coverage, because they were talking about First Amendment rights and equality. Well, let's talk about First Amendment rights and equality. Let's have split media coverage. Basically, all political venues from here on out have to have half of the traditional mainstream media and half of the new media, or what the mainstream media calls as alternative media. Because a great example is, I don't know if you read this the other day, Vince, Media Matters literally doctored a video on InfoWars with Owen Schroyer, who's a great, this guy's in his 20s and just impressive as all get out. Does his homework. He talks about truth. I mean, they basically doctored a video to make InfoWars and Owen Schroyer seem racist. You have to look at this. This is why we need, see, it's not just about anti-conservative, anti-white, anti-male, anti-heterosexual, anti-sexual orientation or Christian name or Christian. Everybody's getting demonetized, but especially when one is for the rule of law. When someone is for the rule of law, you know, we talk about how broke the American people are, especially in the context of immigration. Well, look at some of these budget examples. I said this about a year ago. Our government spent $700,000 to interpret what Neil Armstrong said on the moon. I mean, seriously, I'd rather watch
That's easy.
And ask Ralph Cramden what he thinks about the moon. I mean, we have no accountability anymore, and we have to create ideas and solutions so we can control our own destiny instead of this psyop mind game where the powers that be, especially on the left, keep saying race is the biggest sex massages, climate change, global warming, conspiracy theorist, hater. You know, these words don't even have meanings anymore. They're used every 5 seconds. They don't mean anything. And while the elite are buying time through the distractions and the divisions and the dumbing down of America, you read articles like this. Victor Davis, basically, Macron wants a European army. He can't even make his fair share on NATO payments, and he wants to create a European army because the left needs war. The left needs chaos. The left needs people going at each other's throats in every context, from race, gender, sex to let's invade this country, let's invade that country. Macron, who's one of the spokespeople for the globalists, literally is saying now that nationalism is unpatriotic. This is why we need to read up, research up, speak up, and vote up. The new media is not bought and paid for. Most of us are doing this through citizen journalism as volunteers for our country. We're not expecting anything. And the powers that be, through the mainstream media, are creating illusions of social justice just for people to vote a certain way. Vince, I don't know if you heard about how the left wants to basically Trump's tax forms. They want to publish that. I don't know if you heard about that. And apparently, I don't know if you heard this, but it's now hidden under Obama's college transcripts, his passport application, his immigration status as a student, and his selective service registration. So I don't think they're going to find Trump's tax forms. What do you think?
Well, I've got to tell you, if Donald Trump is the person I think he is, he paid very little taxes. And if you listen to Joel Wallach, USA Prepares instructor, he said on air that if you have a business and if that business is growing, you should not be paying taxes because you should be reinvesting in the business using the tax rules that are that are published by the Internal Revenue Service, another corporation. By using their rules, you can grow your business and not pay taxes as long as your business is growing. He's absolutely correct. So if Donald Trump's businesses are growing, he should not be paying taxes. Tax code is written for people who don't own businesses. I'm sorry, let me say it this way. If you have, the tax code favors those who have businesses and those who have property. If you don't have property and if you don't have a business, meaning you live in an apartment and you have a job, you are at a severe tax disadvantage. You'll be paying more taxes as a percentage of income if you don't have a business and if you don't have property. Now, why is that? Because the people who write the tax laws have businesses and property. I'm talking about, the Congress types, the senator types. People of wealth have businesses and property. And to prove it to everyone listening, all you have to do is think about the people you know. Who is better off? People with businesses or people who have jobs? Who's better off? It's as simple as that. And you will come to the same conclusion that everyone else does. And that is that people who have businesses are better off than people who have jobs. Because the tax laws are written that way to favor the people who have businesses. So they pay less in taxes. So, for example, if I want to buy a four-wheeler and I have a friend who wants to buy a four-wheeler and he has a job and I have a farm, which is a business, my business can buy the four-wheeler. I can ride around on it for business purposes. It's a complete 100% tax deduction. Whereas my friend who might want to buy one, who goes to work, has to pay for his four-wheeler out of after-tax earnings, he doesn't have the tax deduction of the four-wheeler that I do. It's as simple as that. It's very, very simple. So if you want to get ahead, you have to do two things. One, you have to start your own business. And two, you have to be a landowner or a property owner. You have to do that. And if you look at the people who are absolutely broke, they're probably not landowners and they're probably not business owners. Now, just having a business doesn't mean that you're going to succeed in business. There are plenty of people who try to have businesses and fail miserably. So having a business is not a guarantee. It's just the rules are written so that if you do have one, you have a serious competitive advantage. Serious, compared to those who don't have businesses. We got a couple more comments when we come back. So I've got another comment. So I looked up the average private party range of prices for a Mercedes 1999. I know a little bit about Mercedes, so that's why I'm using this. And we have a Mercedes that our son is working on here at the farm, and it needs a power steering rack. Okay, so between the left and right front wheels, there is a steering mechanism. It's let's say 30 inches long. It's got a rack and a pinion, and it's power assisted, so it's got hydraulics. And the price or the cost to have someone replace a power steering rack on a Mercedes-Benz ML320, model ML320, ranges between $1,270 and $3,416. The parts are between $901 and $2,738. That's for the parts. So if you want to have someone do it, it's between $1,270 and $3,416 to have the job done. What's the vehicle worth? Well, according to Kelley Blue Book, the vehicle's worth $1,212. Up to $2,900. They've got an average of of $2,057. But the cost to replace just the steering rack, I'm not talking about the seats, the glass, the doors, the wheels, the tires, the transmission, the engine, just the steering rack, can cost 50% more than the vehicle is worth. So I keep bringing this point back in different ways that vehicles are unaffordable to be repaired. So my recommendation is that you learn how to repair your own vehicle and avoid new vehicles, because new vehicles are way worse than what I'm talking about. And that brings up the point that the media is lying, absolutely lying. Now, how can I prove that? Well, here is a quote from David Rockefeller. It's from the GnosticWarrior.com. David Rockefeller thanks corporate media for the help in the march toward world government. Here it is. Quote, "We're grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other great publications whose directors attended our annual meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subjected to the lights of publicity during those years. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government. The supranational sovereignty of an intellectual elite and world bankers is surely preferable to the national autodetermination practiced in the past centuries." David Rockefeller, 1991. What does that mean? In my world, that means that the media, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and others, conspired to not let the world know the plans for world government for a period of over 40 years. It continues on to today. So how does that affect us? Well, if you go to GCNlive.com, we are broadcasting live right now on Genesis Communications Network. If you go to GCNlive.com, on the left side of the screen, you'll see top GCN Live streams. And number one happens to be, at this moment, USA Prepares. Number two happens to be Alex Jones. Number three, The Bright Side with Ben Fuchs, a USA Prepares instructor. Robert Scott Bell is 4. The Power Hour Nation is number 5. Power Hour number 6. Josh Tully, number 7. Now, those are the top live streams. If you go to TalkStream Live, when we started our program, we were dead last. No one was lower than we were. Now, how is it possible that we're last place when we started the broadcast today on TalkStream Live and first place on GCN Live, which is the 4th largest network? I don't mean it to be self-serving. The point that I'm trying to illustrate is that there is disinformation, misinformation, obfuscation, and intentional confusion by the media on what's really happening. So the number one alternative radio network in the country is Genesis Communications Network. Number two, I believe, is Republic Broadcasting Network. Now, I'm not casting any aspersions on anyone or anything. So Genesis has over 1,000 affiliates. We are originating on Genesis. Republic Broadcasting, owned by John Statmiller, a dear friend of mine, and a dear friend of USA Prepares, kindly, generously, will pick up this broadcast and rebroadcast everything, including Genesis's commercials, on Republic Broadcasting the next day. So Monday's broadcast on Genesis, USA Prepares, airs on Republic Broadcasting on Tuesday. starting at 6 a.m. Central Time. And so the 6 a.m. and 7 a.m. hours are USA Prepares from the previous day. Repeating the broadcast at 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock on RBN. So USA Prepares is available on Genesis, 9 and 10 o'clock hours, and 6 o'clock and 7 o'clock a.m. at Republic Broadcasting, and also 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock on Republic Broadcasting. Now, here's what's very interesting. And I was looking at the ratings during the when we started our broadcast on TalkStream Live. Now, I'm not saying anything negative about TalkStream Live. What I am saying is we started in last place. We never start in last place. Never. We were last, number 92, the bottom-ranked radio broadcast on TalkStream Live. But on Genesis, we're number 1. Okay. Then if you go to TalkStream Live and you look at where is Republic Broadcasting, it's number 28 out of 92. So how is it possible that we could be dead last? I don't get it. How is it possible that our YouTube views used to be over 1,000 a day, like every day, and they've dropped to a couple hundred? How's that possible? I believe that through search engine manipulation at the highest levels, the messages that come out of USA Prepares, and not just us, USA Prepares and others with similar messages about how the little people are being beaten up, how we're being lied to by the mainstream media, I believe our rankings are altered. Now, I'm not saying that TalkStream Live is doing that because I have a feeling they get their numbers from other sources. So how is it possible that Rick Miller's book sales go to 0? If you go to eBay and you look up Richard Allen Miller, you'll see hundreds of offerings on his books. How is it possible that there are so many offerings of Richard Allen Miller's books across eBay as just one source, and he can't sell them directly? How's that possible? Something is wrong. I'm saying that I believe that there is a tremendous amount of manipulation that's going on. And I quoted David Rockefeller's comments from 1991, which thanks the mainstream media for collusion in not letting we, the villagers, know what's really happening. And if you look at, and my mother would be very upset with me for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. I'm sorry, Mom. But if you look at an image of David Rockefeller, Hillary Clinton, Alan Greenspan, George Schwartz, also known as George Soros, Mark Zuckerberg, these are not handsome, pretty faces. They are not pleasant to look at. They're hard to look at. These are the people who are manipulating, I believe, or are involved in manipulating, or are orchestrating the manipulation, or are the source of the manipulation. People like that. And the mainstream media looks at them as they're brilliant. These are the people who we need to admire. Really? Admire Hillary Clinton? Bill Clinton? Alan Greenspan? Admire them? They are shameful individuals, in my opinion. Because they're making it rough on the little people, of which I am one. The bottom 93, as Rich Scheben mentions, the bottom 93%. Rich, do you have any comments on that rant?
Well, yeah, I can confirm everything you just said. We've talked about these non-sanctioned messages that we talk about to benefit the little people instead of kissing the ass of the powers that be. And they use computer algorithms and shadow banning. We've talked about this many times. You know, Rockefeller mentioned that competition is sin. That's basically code talk for lowering the bars of standards and expectations for getting a job. That means you, in the caste system, have a very, very, very small chance of bettering your existence and lifestyle because you can't use hard work, effort, proven results, qualifications, merit, performance. Now, all this means absolutely nothing while the definitions are being changed. And it's the same people who are saying, oh, it's all the white people's fault. But you ever notice all these people, the Zuckerbergs, the Zuckers, the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, Gates, Jonathan Gruber, who architect of Obamacare, who said that you're stupid, or Jeff Bezos, or Murdoch, or the Clintons, or the Soroses, all these people sanctioned messages like anti-white, or anti-male, or anti-heterosexual, or anti-testosterone, or anti-Christian, or anti-whatever. Whatever they do. But yet, all these people are white. But nobody in the left media says it. And it's because of what Vince Finelli just said regarding the, what was it, a 1999 quote from Rockefeller? It's very obvious.
1991.
91. Everybody knows that it's all a psyop. It's all mind games. I mean, how you can't say racist, bigot, sexist, misogynist, global warming, climate change, homophobe, conspiracy theory, ismphobia every 5 seconds and not be a mind game or a psyop. I don't know anybody who's dumb enough to not see through this. Not one. So we have to continue to stand for principle. And those of you who have heard me on the air, there's 3 criteria. And I apologize for those of you who are regular listeners. I know it gets redundant. But this is a base that we need to build on. 3 criteria. 1, the same rules, laws, and accountability for everybody in American soil, not based on a separate tiered system based on what group you're in. 2 is truth. Truth meaning you have to have the guts to be willing to be hated for saying it like it is and telling the truth and using objective facts in lieu of subjective emotional opinion, in lieu of wanting to be liked or loved for blowing smoke up people's ass. And 3rd, which is just as important, if somebody has less consequences for their behavior because of what group they come from, then you get to do it too. Doesn't matter what your shade of skin pigmentation is. Doesn't matter which of the 51 genders you are. Doesn't matter what sex or sexual orientation, religion, or ideology you are. If we built on those 3 criteria for standing for principle, we could change America towards the right direction. But we need the silent majority to speak up. We need you to read up and research up. We can no longer make this a spectator sport, folks. We have to start helping the people, the little people. Even when they say Trump, 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 you know what? I wrote my book during the Obama administration. I've had certain big names say, oh, Rich was emboldened because Trump won. No, I'm not. I wrote the damn book during the Obama administration. And I mentioned it very clearly that his legacy was going to be the great divider. Forget about this left-right paradigm. It's the aristocracy managing and controlling the serfs. And unless you read up and research up and you connect the financial, economic, social, and political dots together and discuss what politically correct actually means, and that means it's defined very simply, and that's by its antonym. And the antonym is truth. And they use every way possible of distorting the truth through group identity politics, professional wordsmithing, media propaganda, Hegelian dialectics, subliminal messaging, and much more. It's meant to divide the American people, to dumb down the American people, to distract with bread and circuses. That's what it's all about. And if you say something that the powers that be does not like, you get demonized, discredited, and delegitimized. In fact, when I hear negative, derogatory things about people, that attracts me to learn more about them and read about what they're saying. Because when you lower the bars of standards and expectations, especially for getting a job, I've said this years ago, you are destroying America from within. You're rewarding mediocrity. You're turning America into a law of diminishing returns. And opportunity, knowledge, ingenuity, productivity, and innovation will not be available for the average Joe, just for the Rockefeller-type elites and their handlers. So
when we come back, I've got a comment. When we come back, I've got a comment about what you said. Competition is the sin. John D. Rockefeller. It's kind of enlightening. We're talking about John D. Rockefeller. And John D. Rockefeller was the head of a company, an American company. It's a corporate trust from 1870 to 1911. And it was an industrial corporation, and it controlled almost all oil production, processing, marketing, and transportation in the United States. The company's origins dated back to 1863. Rockefeller joined Maurice Clark, Samuel Andrews in Cleveland, Ohio, in an oil refining business. In 1865, Rockefeller bought out Clark. 2 years later, he invited a guy named Flagler to join in as a partner in the venture. By 1870, the firm of Rockefeller, Andrews, and Flagler was operating the largest refineries in Cleveland, and these refineries became the property of the new Standard Oil Company, incorporated in Ohio in 1870. 10 years later, through the elimination of competitors, mergers with other firms, and the use of favorable railroad rebates, it controlled the refining of 90 to 95% of all oil produced in the United States. 90 to 95%. Now, you were talking about Rockefeller saying that competition is a sin. Correct. Uh-huh. And what he did was he eliminated that sin by eliminating his competition. That's absolutely true. Absolutely true. Yep. Now, just another little aside here. You know, Standard Oil of New Jersey was the corporation that one of the corporations we're talking about, Rockefeller, Standard Oil. And if you were to just abbreviate that, you could use the letters S and the letter O, Standard Oil. Well, I believe it was in the 30s. I may be wrong, but around then, there was a contest. They wanted to change their name. So they had a contest, like what would be a good name for Standard Oil? Well, the winning entry was the word ESSO, E-S-S-O. If you pronounced the word, which was made up, E-S-S-O, it would sound like S-O, which sounds exactly like S-O in Standard Oil. S period, O period, S-O. And later on in, I think it was 1972, S-O was replaced with Exxon, E-X-X-O-N, and later that name was changed to ExxonMobil. So if you look at ExxonMobil back to Exxon, back to S-O, E-S-S-O, back to Standard Oil, we're talking about John D. Rockefeller.
Mm-hmm. And you see SO all over Canada. It's
yes.
Quite common.
Yes, SO did not change their name in Canada, only in the United States. So SO, E-S-S-O, is currently used in Canada and other countries around the world. But the United States, we use the corporate name of Exxon or ExxonMobil. So that's absolutely true. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I ever told you this, but my mother had very distinctive handwriting. It was art. Okay, when she printed her name, it was in actually art. And John D. Rockefeller hired my mom to handwrite wedding invitations for one of the members of his family, because back then it was not polite to invite with a printer to a wedding. They had to be handwritten invitations. They could be, the envelopes had to be handwritten. And my mom was asked by Rockefeller to handwrite the wedding invitations. Absolutely true story. Of course, my mom did not think much of John D. Rockefeller. She said he was really cheap. And wedding gifts that you would receive from John D. Rockefeller weren't silver, they were silver plate. Can you imagine? The guy who was the richest industrialist in the world. Cheap. Shealy, any final comments in the last 10 seconds?
Last 10 seconds, I want to ask people to listen to Dinesh D'Souza, the campus tour or hashtag fake history debunked tours. You'll learn a lot about this so-called fake racism and bigotry from the Republican Party. Please look up Dinesh D'Souza campus tour.